Hello and welcome to another episode of No Such Thing as a Fish, a weekly podcast coming to you from the QI offices in Covent Garden. My name is Dan Schreiber and I'm sitting here with Anna Ptaszynski, Alex Bell and James Harkin, and once again we have gathered round the microphones with our 4 favorite facts from the last 7 days, and in no particular order, here we go. Starting with you, Ptaszynski.
My fact is that the world record for the longest time spent holding one's breath is exactly the same length as this podcast episode.
Wow. How on earth can we possibly know how long this episode's going to be?
My magic powers and knowledge that you're a good editor have told me.
So tell me, how long do I have to edit to?
So you have to edit to 24 minutes and 3 seconds, if that's okay. And this was a record that was set by Alex Segura in 2016, and he's a champion in the sport of static apnea.
I can't believe it's a sport.
It's a sport.
Amazing.
It's a sport.
It's the sport of lying face down in a swimming pool and holding your breath while remaining still.
That feels like something I can get on board with for the Olympics.
We should say that this record that he broke is looked down upon by some static apneists, including himself, actually, because this one involved him inhaling pure oxygen. That means you can hold your breath for much, much longer. So that doubles the volume of oxygen that you can store in your lungs.
So you breathe oxygen for something like 30 minutes before you go for the record attempt.
Yeah.
So 24 minutes, that's the length of a sitcom episode, if you were watching an American sitcom without adverts.
Well, is it, though? Yeah.
Well, not the new Netflixy style sitcoms, but if you go classic Seinfeld or Friends episode.
Specifically Seinfeld. Seinfeld's getting shorter.
What?
So, the TBS have been caught broadcasting episodes of Seinfeld in fast forward 9% faster than the original recording.
So does he sound like a chipmunk?
No, weirdly he doesn't, because you can get away with like maybe up to about 15% without really noticing it. If you put them side by side, obviously, like you notice. But who does that?
Was Alvin and the Chipmunks originally like 4 hours long, each cartoon?
It's a sort of cinema noir.
That is amazing. So you lose, what, 6 minutes an hour? That's a lot.
Yeah, exactly. So you get an extra minute or so of adverts for each episode.
On sitcoms, do you know that the world's first sitcom, no episodes survive of it? This is just I've only mentioned this because it's the kind of thing that makes Alex really angry. But it was on the BBC and it was broadcast from 1946 to 47. It was called Pinwright's Progress. And I was just really excited to see it because it stars someone called James Hayter, who played Friar Tuck in a Robin Hood film that I swear no one else on earth has ever seen except me. And I recognised him.
I thought it was because you're a James hater.
And that subconsciously, I think, was the reason that I pursued this fact further.
There's a footballer called James Hayter, and my brother used to always like him because my brother's also a James Hayter.
We've got a big club. But yeah, they've lost all the episodes. James Hayter was also, by the way, the original voice of Mr. Kipling makes exceedingly good cakes.
That's very cool.
The thing I love about this breathing thing is people who do it without oxygen have gone for about half as long as Alex Segura. But whoever does it, if you really push yourself to the limit, when you come up, would you have thought you breathe in or out?
You always breathe out.
You always breathe out, right?
Despite where's there's no oxygen.
No,
how would
because
you
you've
do
got
Well-
loads of carbon dioxide in your lungs, right?
Well, so we always breathe out, right? Because when you suddenly start getting out of breath underwater, it's because your body has this automatic response to having too much buildup of carbon dioxide, which is an emergency response which says, get up, breathe, breathe, breathe. Because if you've got too much carbon dioxide, it knows you're going to run out of oxygen. But all these champion static apneists have learned to totally override that response. So they go underwater, they hold their breaths, and the oxygen just gets absorbed and absorbed and absorbed. So by the time they come up, they need to breathe in straight away.
Yeah.
So that's how you spot the difference between an expert and an amateur. We breathe out and they breathe in.
I suppose the other way of spotting an amateur versus expert is the expert comes up 24 minutes later. Whereas I was reading that insects often hold their breath, and they do it for hours and even days at a time. And the reason is that too much air would actually kill them. So they're actually stopping air from coming in to save their lives because too much of it damages their tissues. So it's simply a process of stopping.
So too much oxygen damages them.
Yeah. Exactly.
They oxidize, do they? Like rust.
That's why they're all a bit brown.
Is that
insects? Yeah.
They're all rusty.
They're all just rusty, yeah. But yeah, if you see an insect, it's most likely holding its breath.
That's so cool.
I was reading a 2016 Stanford University study about sighing, and sighing is really interesting. So, like, sighing is basically just a breathing in and then breathing in again instead of breathing out. So you're just taking in twice as much air. And the reason you do it, or one of the reasons you do it, is to inflate the alveoli more than it usually gets, because your alveoli are always sort of collapsing, the
alveoli are the tiny little sacs on the edge of your lungs
yeah.
that absorb the oxygen into the rest of your body, aren't they?
Yeah, lots of different alveoli are just collapsing on their own, and so they periodically need to just be reinflated with a massive amount of air in your lungs, and that's what sighing is.
I always thought I sighed because I was really fed up with the 29th pun in a row that James had told, but it's actually just all about my alveoli.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
James hater. Go back to your club.
And what's really interesting is that when they originally built iron lungs, which are the coffin-like things that you put people in when they're having breathing difficulties, and it's basically a pressure chamber that forces people to breathe from the outside. The mechanism didn't account for sighing, as in the iron lung didn't sigh, it only did normal breathing in and out, and people kept dying, and this is when they realised this is what accounted for it, because their lungs are collapsing.
themselves to death.
No, they didn't sigh themselves to death because they weren't sighing, because the iron lung was only doing normal breathing for them, and it wasn't doing some sort of sigh.
If we didn't sigh, we'd die. If you don't sigh, you die.
Yeah.
That should be on signs everywhere.
Well,
Just in case.
it is a subconscious reflex, Hannah. You don't usually need to advertise those.
They don't have signs everywhere going, don't forget to breathe.
Keep blinking.
God knows I need these things. I forget.
Okay, it is time for fact number 2, and that is Alex.
My fact this week is that Nikola Tesla was one of the guests at the first ever party with a stripper jumping out of a cake.
Amazing.
Incredible.
It's a really cool party.
What was he doing there?
Well, he was just one of sort of several quite prominent guests. This was a party thrown by a guy called Stanford White, who was sort of a member of the New York elite at the end of the 19th century. Really interesting character himself, actually.
Controversial character as well.
Yeah. So he threw all sorts of sort of exciting dinner parties and drinks parties and things like this. And this one was on May the 20th, 1895. And one of the attractions of this party was a scantily clad girl called Susie Johnson, we actually know her name, emerging from a pie made from galvanized iron, accompanied by a recitation of Sing a Song of Sixpence.
Yeah.
Well, plus birds, right? I think birds flew out along with her, didn't they?
Really? That
She
makes
jumped
more
out.
sense.
Yeah.
Wow.
But the birds that came out were canaries. And in the movie of this, which I watched the other night for research purposes,
What's it called?
It's called The Girl on the Velvet Swing.
Oh, yeah.
Starring Joan Collins as the character who is basically Susie Johnson. The guy comes in and he's like, "Oh, sorry, I couldn't find any blackbirds, but I've got canaries."
Oh, really?
Yeah, so
The girl, was it also like, I couldn't find a velvet swing, but I've got a cast iron cake?
Well,
So
we'll probably
actually,
get to this in a bit,
How
right?
did you sing it? Was it like sexy, like Sing a Song of Sixpence? Because I can't work out how you
To
sing
be
that.
honest, the bit with the pie, I kind of left the room and went to my kitchen to get a drink, and when I came back, I think I missed the pie bit. But the rest of it is all about this guy, Stanford White, who, like Dan's about to say, is very controversial.
Yeah, very controversial. The reason for the title of The Velvet Swing is to do with his controversiality. He used to like to sneak girls back to a house of his in Manhattan, and no good way of saying it, drug and rape them. That was his very bad human. And the girl on the Velvet Swing refers to a girl who he did this to when she was age 16.
Yes, because her husband, who I think his name was Thor or
Yes,
something like
that's
that.
right.
Not Thor as in the Norse god, Thor as in what happens to snow when it's warm.
Yes.
He then
I
shot
was very confused in the cinema. I saw a very boring film that I was very much looking forward to.
the Marvel movie where it's just snow melting. He was at a theatre performance of Mademoiselle Champagne's I Could Love a Million Girls, and then Thor came over and shot Stanford White in the face.
Yeah, and this was in about 1905, wasn't it?
That's
But this is why this whole jumping out of cake thing became well known, because in the court case, everyone suddenly read about this amazing cake woman party, and then I guess it became a thing.
Imagine that's the bit of your obituary that sticks out. So you've just been murdered by a millionaire in a public space, And then everyone's
But you've
going,
done
hang
the
on, what's this cake bit? That sounds pretty
Coolest thing
cool.
ever. He made history in the sort of in the industry of raunchy parties.
Yeah,
Like,
he's done the
it's
world a
first.
service
Like,
in his murder.
But he did the world a disservice because there were more repercussions afterwards. So the whole thing was covered by a journalist called Merrill Goddard. And then Merrill Goddard was so good at covering this case that Randolph Hearst, who was a newspaper proprietor, decided to take her for his newspaper. She was working with Pulitzer, and then Hearst and Pulitzer had a massive competition against each other for who could get the most readers for their newspaper, and that turned into sensational journalism, and that's why we have red top journalism today.
Wow.
And it all came from there.
So your fact says she jumped out of a cake. It was a pie.
Sorry.
When did it become cake? It was a pie. I mean, was it a crusted top pie?
In the movie, it looks like one of those, where it's got crisscross of pastry on the top
Yeah.
of it. But that might just be for the movies.
I guess it makes sense that traditionally there's like in banquets and stuff in sort of medieval times, you've got very elaborate pies and things coming out of pies.
Yeah.
And then it becomes more of a tradition to do things at parties. And at parties we now have cake. So they just said, well, why don't we have people jumping out of cakes? It's a bit weird to have a pie at like a birthday
Yeah.
party. But I guess cakes are more practical to jump out of and to hide in, really, because they can be taller.
You could have a tall pie.
yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I think
the
they
base
look a
can
bit
just
weird.
go up
I mean,
as high as you
I'd
want
be
it.
suspicious if I saw a really tall pie, I'd be like, there's a person in there. Whereas you can have a big
What
cake
do
and
you
be like, have no idea there's a
Hang
person
on.
You should be like,
if
it's a
you
huge
saw a
cake.
giant cake come in, you would suspend suspicion that there's a human in there and think this is probably all
Yeah,
cake.
because
It
we've
could
all
be-
watched
it could
Bake
be-
Off.
It could be a big cake.
Can I give my favourite jumping out of a pie incident?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
So this was one of the earliest ones, I think. It was in 1454, and it was when things being hidden in pies was used as a rallying cry of the Christians against the Ottomans. So this was kind of during the era of the Crusades. It was King Philip who threw this really, really elaborate banquet with sort of jousting and these amazing table decorations that we've talked about before. And then he led everyone into this really long table. And on the table, he had this giant pie, and the pie opened up mechanically to reveal 28 playing musicians. So an orchestra of 28 people who leapt out of the pie and played.
Do you think if you saw a cake that size, you'd think just a normal cake?
Well, if it had music coming out of it, I'd be like, there's something else going on. Maybe not people inside, but
We don't know what song they played.
We don't know what song they played, although we do know at that same party there was a statue of a beautiful woman who had wine springing from her breast that
Yeah.
people could drink from.
At this party, Stanford White's party,
Yeah.
he was serving wine, but he had a blonde waitress who only served white wine and a brunette who only served red wine.
Really? That's quite nice. It's
Well,
like
is it?
having a lid to match the bottle kind of thing.
I know what you're saying, but then on the other hand, it's not very woke, is it?
It's slightly objectifying these women, I'll give you that.
But as we've established, this guy doesn't have the best track record with
No.
women. Susie Johnson, the lady who jumped out of the pie cake, we don't know what happened to her. She's another mystery in the whole story. She disappeared. People tried to track her down because she became, as you say, we know her name.
Did they just check every cake? She's not in this one. It's the Mr. Kipling factory. Not in this one.
Multiple weddings ruined once again. The cake police swoop in.
Okay, it's time for fact number 3, and that is my fact. My fact this week is that when in London, Queen Louise of Sweden always carried a card saying, "I am the Queen of Sweden," in case she was hit by a bus.
Cocky.
Well, she used to travel around London, as it were, in disguise. She didn't go around with an entourage. She loved shopping, and so she would just go on her own. And one time she was almost hit by a bus. As a result, she decided, God, if I was hit by this bus, how would people know who I was? Why don't I carry a card inside my handbag that says, "I am the Queen of Sweden," and then they'll be like,
Well,
we know who
and then
she
the
is.
people who found her, rather than going, I guess we'll just leave her there, we don't really care, we'll go, oh, hang on, she's the queen, we better sort out this car accident situation.
Also, it's a really weird reaction to have when you're about to be hit by a bus. The normal reaction is, wow, I should be more careful crossing the road.
Yeah.
Not when that inevitably happens again, I better make sure I'm properly labelled.
well, you're the only one that I know of who's
Don't.
almost been hit by a bus. How did you react?
I shouted at the bus.
What did you shout?
Go back to bus school.
This is one of the greatest anecdotes in QI history, isn't it? That comes up basically every week.
In shock.
Alex
Go
was
back to
almost,
bus school.
That's the greatest line ever.
Would you keep that on a card in your handbag? Just hand out to the bus driver.
Wouldn't it be amazing though if whenever you call 999, if you find someone unconscious on the floor, you call 999, they say, okay, cool. So first things first, have you looked through their handbag and have you checked their business cards? Is it the Queen of Sweden? Okay.
This has happened before.
She was really great though, Queen Louise of Sweden, wasn't she? In her first passport, it had a thing called special peculiarities where you put things about your face if you have a scar or whatever, and she wrote walks like a parrot.
Really? She's just to put her into a bit of context, she is the auntie of Prince Philip.
Yes, and it was so she was the Mountbatten family, formerly Battenbergs, wasn't she?
That's right.
Battenbergs, who hurriedly changed their name to Mountbatten when the Germans became the bad guys.
Yeah.
And she was the great-granddaughter of Queen Victoria, I think.
Yes.
But all the European royal families are all just related to each other, aren't they?
They are.
Really.
And during World War II, because all of the royal families are all related to each other, but then they were all in countries that were all fighting against each other, she worked as a messenger, kind of giving messages between all of her family
did she?
weren't allowed to talk to each other.
Not a spy.
I suppose you could call it a spy, couldn't you? I mean, it's pretty much basically a double agent. But I think she was doing it quite explicitly and not hiding.
Not sitting
it,
on a
really.
bench handing over a message and they're like, I am the Queen of Sweden. What does this mean? Oh, sorry, wrong card.
And presumably it was more like, Bobby just had a baby, rather than
I think so.
the Nazis are on their way across the channel.
Yeah.
The Swedish royal family is quite interesting, though, and the modern Swedish royal family is as well. So there's Carl the 16th, who's king now, who I don't think we've ever said on the podcast is the 10th King Carl of Sweden.
Who did they miss out?
They added lots. It goes back to the 15th century when a guy called Johann Magnus wrote this sort of fanciful history of all the Swedish kings, and he just added a whole bunch of kings. So he made up he made up 6 Erics and 6 Karls, and they've kept that numerical system ever since.
But
So there
why
are
were they
6 Karls.
referring to this fictional account as history?
Because
They
it
just didn't
became
realise?
really popular. It was a bit like the sagas, It became a thing that was always read.
I think it's like we have King Arthur, for
King
instance.
Arthur, yeah.
And so if we were to have a new King Arthur, we would probably call him Arthur II, wouldn't we?
Oh, I'd love to see.
And if Prince Harry became king, he would be Henry the Ninth. He'd be our
Yes.
first Henry since the dreaded Henry VIII.
Well,
the
if he
eighth
kept the name, right? Although sometimes you take on a different name when you become royal.
Because Prince
true.
Charles will,
Yes.
we think.
Become Henry.
He won't become Charles. No, we were discussing this.
We were.
We had a party last week at my place, which you were invited to, but you didn't come. And it was so exciting that we started talking about the regnal numbers of the kings and queens of England.
I'm
It's like,
so
he's
sorry I
going to
couldn't
become-
make it, guys.
He's
It's
going to
sounded great.
be Edward the Ninth, I think we found
That
out,
was what
didn't
you
we?
thought. That's what the bookies reckon.
Yeah,
Is it?
I think so.
I should quickly add just about the main fact itself. I've read this in a few places, found a few sources, but nothing that I would say is concrete enough that I want to see the card. And if anyone knows if the card exists,
So the source for this, the original source, was Queen Louise's niece Dolla, who was the Margravine of Baden. I don't know what that means, but anyway, it was a relative who first said this.
yeah. Okay, that's a good source. Thank you. Thank you all for helping me out.
Some of us have been researching this.
Okay, it is time for our final fact of the show, and that is James.
Okay, my fact this week is that last year in the UK, 2 8-year-olds were caught speeding. This came from a Freedom of Information question that was posed to the Driver and Vehicle Licensing Agency, and they asked for all of the different statistics. And they also found out that 900 people in their 90s got penalty points for speeding last year, including 3 people aged 99. Although I reckon
99.
that's the oldest, but it's quite a coincidence that it's 99 and not 100 and something. So I reckon anyone that's over 99, they just put 99. Maybe there's only 2 spaces in the form or something.
Oh,
like that.
wow, yeah.
I reckon.
Or you just don't find someone who's 100 or more for speeding.
No,
you
come
just
on.
ask their age and go, fair enough, mate. Go on.
Unfair that you dock the 99-year-old, though.
Well, you
It's
know,
like
you've
one
got
more
to,
year and you're home.
yeah, you've got to hang on to your 100th birthday. That's
okay.
like saying unfair that you won't let the 15-year-old smoke when the 16-year-old's allowed to. I mean, you've got to draw the line somewhere, haven't you?
Okay,
that's
sure.
true.
99, that's the line. All right.
Sorry, I also think the smoking age might have gone up since I was a smoker. So 16-year-olds, if it's illegal, just check.
Or, whatever, don't smoke as well. Well, maybe consider that.
There have been quite a lot of weird speeding fines and driving fines this year. So there have been 2 instances of people getting caught driving to the hospital because their wives are in labour and getting stopped for speeding. And so one was in the UK going at 101 miles an hour. And then there was another guy in the US who missed the birth of his child because he was taken to a cell.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh, that's hard.
Wow.
It's really rough,
Because
isn't
in
it?
the movies, there's no repercussions when you see them breaking all the laws to get to
the police
hospital.
officer usually like, on the contrary, I'll give you an escort, which has never happened in real life ever. Yeah.
That happened to me once in Oldham.
Really?
As in, I wasn't speeding, but I was stuck, and then the police gave me a lift to the football game because they thought I'd missed the game. And they put the siren on, and they're probably not allowed to do this, but they put the siren on, and everyone moved out of the way, and we flew through Oldham. To
No
get
way.
to the football game.
Ridiculous.
Just to get you to the...
Yeah.
How were you stuck?
We got off at the wrong train station.
What?
That's
There's nothing
stuck.
even went wrong. That's just bad travelling on your part.
It's just awesome policing by the policeman who's probably since been fired.
Absolutely nothing else going on in Oldham if they're just doing that. Just being like, where are you going? Can we give you a lift?
Yeah.
Sean Connery was once stopped for speeding by an officer named Sergeant James Bond.
No.
that
Yeah.
Wow.
That's good.
I really hope he did the names Bond, James Bond.
But I'm going to need to see your license to kill. And then your actual license.
We have in our book, we've got a similar sort of
What
story.
book's that, Dan?
It's called the Book of the Year 2018, your
Okay.
definitive guide to the world's weirdest news.
Do you know when it comes out?
Yeah, October the 18th.
Okay, where's
Yeah.
it available?
It's going to be in bookshops. It's going to be online. It's
Andy's not here. We could say Amazon.
Amazon. It's going to be on Amazon. Yes.
This is the first I've heard of this.
Remember we found that thing of the guy who was done for drink driving, but claimed that he wasn't drink driving because he was only drinking every time he got to a traffic stop sign.
That's
So
good.
he'd stop, have a swig, and then get going again.
This is... Sorry, go on.
No, you go. I was just sighing. I just want to stay alive.
Did you know the first person to pass a driving test was called Mr. Beer?
No, I didn't know
It's in
that.
1935. He paid 37.5p. Just found that out. And also found out this weird thing that driving tests were suspended in the Second World War, which
Yeah.
makes sense. They were suspended again during the Suez Crisis, which is quite weird, and especially given that during the Suez Crisis, learners were allowed to drive unaccompanied.
And
And then-
think, I don't know about Suez Crisis, but it's definitely true of the Second World War that if you learned to drive during the war, they just gave you a license. You didn't need to take a test at all.
What, just because you've been
Well,
through
like
the war?
You've learned how to
like-
drive. You obviously, if you could drive enough to defeat the Nazis, then
Yeah.
you could drive enough to go
If
to
you
the
can,
shop.
if you can
right.
drive a tank through a minefield and not get blown up, I think you can manage
Yeah.
the M25
You're
rush
right.
hour.
Speaking of tanks, I read this yesterday. So you're allowed to drive a tank on the road in the UK. You need a special license. But if you could get a provisional license, which is really easy, a provisional tank license, then as long as there's someone sat next to you who can drive a tank, then you can drive a tank through the streets of the UK at any time. But you need to have learner plates on the tank. But you would be able to do
Wow,
that. if you
that's
wanted.
so
Actually,
cool.
I knew that because QI's production coordinator was telling me a great story about how she had to get James Blunt to drive a tank through the BBC.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
That was, yeah.
Wow.
Because he was an
That's
army guy, so he knows how to drive a tank.
Yeah.
But where do you get a tank? This still feels like the main stumbling block.
My buddy
she
had
just,
a tank.
Yeah, she just knew a guy.
Okay.
They just, there's-
Buddy had a tank.
Yeah.
Who's your buddy?
Ed, you've met Ed once. We met him outside Burger Shack.
oh, yeah, the guy in the
Shake Shack.
tank.
Yeah, his name's Ed Superior, and he bought a
he was
tank.
really late because he was trying to find somewhere to park.
He used to have it parked outside Ash Gardner of Empress's house. They were neighbours, and outside was his tank.
Wow.
And we used to go and sit inside it. He made it into this really nice sort of, where you have Netflix nights kind
Oh,
of
it
thing.
was a
In case-
hipster tank.
Yeah.
Oh, it was
But
a wank tank.
Okay, that is it. That is all of our facts. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to get in contact with any of us about the things that we have said over the course of this podcast, we can be found on our Twitter accounts. I'm on @Schreiberland, James,
At James Harkin.
Alex,
At Alex Bell.
and Jasinski.
You can email podcast@qi.com.
Yep, or you can go to our group Twitter account, which is @NoSuchThing, or to our website, nosuchthingasafish.com. It's just been remade. It has everything you would need from us if you wanted anything from us. It's got links to tickets, has all of our previous episodes, it has all of our merchandise. It looks awesome. I gotta speed up. Okay, that's it. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.